Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on the shoulder of Interstate 70 west of Denver when the first emergency messages pushed through every radio channel at once. My name is Ethan Cole, civil engineer for the Colorado Department of Transportation, and on that morning, I was documenting storm damage at a multi-level overpass near Genesee, at the edge of Mount Vernon Canyon. A thunderstorm the night before had thrown debris down the slopes, undercutting some riprap around the piers. I had a yellow hard hat, a safety vest with reflective tape, a clipboard, and a digital level that I kept checking against the rail. It was routine work. It stopped being routine when the state EAS tones bled across the FM band, and then the AM band, and even the VHF work radio that normally carried nothing but maintenance chatter. A flat voice said, "Biohazard quarantine in effect. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. Proceed to the nearest shelter." Then another voice cut in, louder, closer to panic, and after that, there was only static and overlapping sirens drifting up from the east. I looked up from the pier seat toward the long, stacked tangle of lanes that formed the overpass, eastbound and westbound main lines, a sweeping, elevated ramp that split toward US 40, and an old service road that slipped under everything like a creek through culverts. Traffic slowed and bunched in both directions, horns, brake lights, a semi-jackknife the next lane over, the trailer folding to an angle that turned its white sheet metal into a bright wall. My field truck, a white CDOT F250 with tool cabinets and a ladder rack, sat behind my temporary arrow board. The arrow board kept flashing its pattern to move left, trying to herd drivers away from our inspectors. The lights looked absurd in the growing noise. Riley Carter was 30 yards away, adjusting a tripod over a crack that traced along a shoulder joint. He was CDOT maintenance, but also the best problem solver in our region, a former Army mechanic who could improvise repairs from scrap and a roll of safety wire. He turned when he heard the tones, grimaced and shouted, "You hearing that too?" "Yeah," I said, tapping my headset. "Something's wrong downtown." He looked at the traffic again, eyes tracking the jam backing up the grade toward the Lookout Mountain exit. "Feels wrong up here too." A patrol cruiser slid in behind our truck with its light bar on, blue and red bouncing off the aluminum of my ladder rack. Trooper Marcus DeSoto stepped out, tall, dark hair clipped close, the kind of posture that tells you he's thinking 2 moves ahead of everyone else. We'd met a dozen times on storm response and crash support, and he always arrived before most people realized he'd been called. "Ethan," he said, voice even, "we're getting mixed guidance, but I'm going to lock this location down until we know more. Stay close to your truck. Can you shut the arrow board and move your cones to block the shoulder under us? We may need a safe pocket." "What's going on?" I asked. His radio squawked. He listened, jaw tightening. "Hospitals are overwhelmed. People are turning violent. We're being told to avoid contact and hold positions. I need a high ground spot with barriers." "You're standing on one," Riley said, pointing to the elevated ramp above us. "That ramp deck has concrete barriers both sides, and the only access is the approach from the west and the spiral drop to the service road." We all looked at the traffic again. The jam had gone from slow to stalled, a red ribbon pinned by the grade. A moving van pulled sideways across 2 lanes. A sedan tapped bumpers with the truck ahead and then sat still, no one getting out. Sirens pulsed from the east. A helicopter's rotors thumped somewhere behind the hills. To our south, a private ambulance with its rear doors open idled on the breakdown lane. An EMT in a navy shirt and long braid. Lena Park, I would learn later, was kneeling by a man on the ground near the guardrail. The patient's skin was pale, and he was not moving. She checked his pulse, called to her partner in the cab, then looked up at the noise rolling toward us. She had the focused face of someone who knew the weight of 30 seconds during a crisis and what it meant to pick the right 30 seconds. Everything changed very fast after that. There was yelling across the lanes, a woman waving her arms, two men struggling with a third, who was flailing in the back seat of a compact car. A pickup clipped a barrier and spun, blocking a lane. The sound of a crash is a layered thing, impact, shattering plastic and glass, tires dragging across pavement, and even if you've heard it 100 times in controlled training videos, it still hits your reflexes like a jolt. I started toward our truck to grab flares and first aid, but Marcus caught my arm. "Hold," he said. "We need to pull back. We don't know what's happening." Another set of EAS tones cut in, sharper, more urgent. "Shelter in place," the voice said. "Avoid exposure to bodily fluids. Law enforcement and emergency services are responding. Do not attempt to flee on major corridors." "Looks like everyone got the opposite memo," Riley said, nodding to the river of vehicles now packing every lane. On the eastbound side, the lanes below us, an SUV rolled to a stop behind a city bus. People inside were arguing. The passenger in the front seat slumped forward into the dash, bounced back, then began thrashing in his seatbelt. The driver tried to steady him. The passenger's movements changed from clumsy to abrupt and focused. He lunged, and the driver's hands shot up in surprise. The SUV rocked. The driver's door flew open. The driver stumbled out and fell. He tried to crawl away and then stopped moving altogether. I am an engineer, not a medic, and not law enforcement, and yet I will never forget the training modules on scene safety. Do not become part of the incident. Under normal conditions, that means staying out of lanes, watching for fuel leaks, controlling bystanders. On that morning, scene safety meant something else. People who had been injured or sick were now getting up and moving in ways that made the hair on my arms stand up. The word infected began to repeat in the radio traffic. The word isolate came next. Marcus keyed his mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17, Genesee Overpass. We have an escalating situation with multiple injured and violent individuals, requesting guidance." Static, then a voice too rushed to be useful. "Units hold positions. Control lost at multiple." Then more static. Another voice cut in with a single sentence. "Do not allow bites or exposure." Lena shouted from the ambulance, voice ringing clean across the lane. "Trooper, we need to move up. They're converging. We can't handle it down here." Her partner, a man with a shaved head and broad shoulders, was half in the driver's seat, hand on the gear shift. He was watching the mirrors. 3 people we hadn't noticed moments before were already moving toward them along the guardrail, stumbling at first, then accelerating with unnerving determination. Marcus weighed everything in 1 second. He gestured at me and Riley. "We're going to use the elevated ramp above. Ethan, that spot you mentioned. Get your truck up the spiral. Riley, grab what you can for barricades. I'll bring the ambulance behind us. Move." Orders helped. Orders turned a chaotic scene back into a list. I jogged to the C-Dot truck, swung into the cab, brought the V8 to life, and pointed the nose toward the little access that looped up and around to the ramp deck. My hands were steady on the wheel, but there was a hollow feeling in my chest that I recognized from near misses in fieldwork. The knowledge that a chain of events had already been set in motion beyond my control. I drove anyway. The spiral up was tight. I threaded past a stalled delivery van and 2 cars, brushed a side mirror, and came out on the elevated ramp, its concrete painted with lane arrows and its shoulders patrolled by chain link and concrete barrier. The ramp bent left and rose, giving a view east toward downtown Denver. Smoke rose in thin lines from multiple spots along the city grid. I could see the ridge of Lookout Mountain behind me, and the I-70 grades stacked with red taillights. I parked at the apex of the ramp, leaving room to build a defense in front of the truck. Riley arrived seconds later in the maintenance flatbed we kept for debris. He had already loaded it with what he could grab. Type 3 barricades, cones, a bucket of flare wicks, a coil of rebar tie wire, rope, a sledge, a bolt cutter, and a gas-powered cut-off saw with a diamond blade. He climbed out and surveyed the deck with a professional eye. "We block the top with vehicles and barriers," he said. "We can use the rebar tie wire through the barrier handles. I'll chain the flatbed across the lane." On the radio, Marcus said, "Ambulance approaching the spiral. Individuals on foot engaging vehicles. I'm bringing them up hot." I jogged to the rail and looked down. The spiral below us was now a funnel. People were moving up from the service road, some injured, some simply panicked, some with a single focus that did not look like panic. The ambulance came around the curve at a crawl, siren off, lights still on, pushing past abandoned vehicles that narrowed the path to a single lane. Two men ran at it from opposite sides. Marcus accelerated just enough to keep them from reaching the doors, steering with one hand and keeping the other near his holster. When the ambulance reached the top, Riley and I dragged a concrete barrier across the opening together, using the bolt cutter handles as levers under the base and rocking it forward a few inches at a time until it sealed the gap. The deck was ours for the moment. The wind was picking up. You could hear the flags slapping on distant poles and the dry rasp of leaves in the chain link. We set to work. Riley parked the maintenance flatbed at an angle across the lanes nearest the spiral gap. I parked the CDOT F250 nose to nose with it to form a wedge. The patrol cruiser and the ambulance took the centre. We laid Type 3 barricades on their sides and laced them to the barrier handles with tie wire. We stacked cones and wedged them into the cracks to keep movement limited to narrow bottlenecks. My hands learned a rhythm. Pull wire, twist with pliers, cinch. Test by leaning my weight. Move to the next point. I have built headwalls for culverts in spring flood and cribbing around piers for temporary support. None of that construction had the urgent clarity of making a fence to separate us from people who had already lost the kind of patience that keeps neighbours neighbours. Lena climbed out of the ambulance with a red trauma bag over one shoulder and a smaller bag with airway gear. Her partner stayed in the driver's seat, scanning and calling out any approach he saw from below. Lena's eyes were sharp but not wild. She went to the man they had been working on earlier. He had been pulled into the back of the ambulance and checked him. Then she turned to me. "What we're seeing down there," she started. "I saw," I said. "We don't know much." "We know this," she said, voice steady. "If someone is bitten and symptoms start, it goes fast. Minutes. They lose awareness, then they get up again, and they move toward whoever is closest. Keep distance. Use barriers and tools, not hands." "We have tools," I said, pointing to the racks. "Pry bars, sledge, axes, fire extinguishers on the truck and the ambulance. I'll pass them around." Marcus did a fast inventory. Duty pistol and spare magazines, patrol rifle locked in the cruiser, shotgun in the rack, a med kit in every vehicle. He spoke in clear sentences, the kind that carry in wind. "No one fights alone. Back each other. Keep people from crossing the barriers. Avoid close contact. If we have to move, we move together." Within 15 minutes, the spiral opening was sealed with concrete barriers and a lattice of barricades we had wired into a continuous fence. The higher approach from the west was still open, but we had enough vehicles to block it to a single choke point and enough elevation to see anything coming. We had a deck, 4 vehicles, and whatever we had grabbed before the world made a different shape. The first hour on the deck felt elastic, stretched by adrenaline and compressed by tasks. We could hear the highway below us like surf, engines, voices, the occasional grinding of metal. Some people tried to climb the barriers. We shouted at them to move on, to seek shelter off the main line, to stay away from the spiral because it led to us. Most of them moved off on their own, drawn by other noises or the belief that the next exit would be better. Some of them did not try to talk at all. They simply walked into the fences or banged on the concrete with hands that did not seem to register pain. We kept our distance. We learned immediately the value of a 6-foot steel pry bar when someone's hands get too close. As the afternoon dropped into evening, we tuned our radios to scan through state, county, CDOT, and even the NOAA weather frequency just to hear a normal voice pronounce wind speeds and relative humidity. The weather voice did not feel real anymore. The rest of the channels were broken clips of coordinated responses that sounded like they were losing their center. A Denver dispatcher called for units that never answered. A hospital requested more security at its emergency entrance and then went silent. The State Guard frequency crackled with orders to hold, and then another voice we didn't recognize said flatly, "If you are not in a fortified building, do not expect rescue tonight." We had to think about tonight. We had to make this deck a place where we could survive a dark period on a roadway designed for movement, not living. Riley took point on power. He found a small generator in the maintenance flatbed, a portable unit we used for light tools, and 2 5-gallon fuel cans. He also found a spool of 12-gauge extension cord and a string of LED work lights we normally hung inside culverts during inspections. He set the generator behind the barrier wall, so its sound would be muffled and its light would not beacon into the canyon. He ran one circuit to the LED lights, zip-tying them along the fence so they cast our side of the deck in a dull, even glow that didn't throw sharp shadows where someone could hide. He ran another circuit to the ambulance to keep its radios and interior lights on without draining the battery. I focused on structure. We had to place mass where it mattered. Concrete barriers are called K-rail for a reason. They redirect energy when cars hit them. They're not designed to be outward opening gates. We turned that to our advantage by creating corners where we could create a narrow turn and keep unknowns from surging straight through. We used seatbelts scavenged from abandoned cars as lashings when our tie wire ran low, threading the webbing through the barrier handles and ratcheting them tight with a come-along we found in the maintenance box. The result would not stop a vehicle if someone tried to ram it, but it would slow foot traffic and give us space. Marcus handled perimeter and people. He directed strangers who climbed the west approach to keep moving. He warned a family of 4 not to bring their sick grandfather across our fence. They took one look at the man's eyes and their own fear, and chose to cut through the median toward the trees instead. He kept his voice level. He kept his sidearm holstered and his patrol rifle slung. He understood that once we showed force, the situation would change in an irreversible way. We all understood it too, but we were grateful for the weight of the weapons anyway. Lena triaged the small population we had on the deck, us and 2 drivers who had chased safety to higher ground and then realized they had nowhere to go. One had a sprained wrist from a crash. The other had cuts from broken glass. She bandaged them with clean wraps and taped splints without ceremony. She checked our team for scratches. She said quietly, "If you feel feverish, tell me immediately." No one did. We all drank water and ate from whatever we had packed, a protein bar from my glove box, a bag of almonds from Riley's duffel, a few MRE components that Marcus kept in his cruiser for long incidents. Night on the overpass came with a sudden drop in temperature. The front range does that. Sun warm on the concrete at 4 p.m, chill pushing through your jacket at 8 p.m. We kept the LED lights low and pointed inward. We rotated watches. We spoke in low voices. When vehicles below us honked, we ignored it. When someone tried to climb the spiral 50 feet down, we shined a flashlight and told them to move on. Most did. Some didn't. A few turned their faces up toward the light and reached up the fence for us with a kind of single-minded urgency. We did not pull them up. We could not. By midnight, the city glow was dimmer than usual, as if someone had pulled a shade half closed on Denver. We could see the outline of the mountains against a sky that had thinned its stars to a few stubborn points. It was a quiet, like the pause between the last light traffic and the first snowplow shift, except the noises that came through that quiet were out of place. Feet on concrete, distant shouts, the sound of something metallic dragging against a barrier and then stopping all at once. At 2:30 a.m, the ambulance radio, patched to medical coordination when the system works, carried a final plain message before going to static. Hospitals operating at capacity. If you cannot reach a safe building with security, shelter in your vehicle and remain there until daylight. Do not attempt to approach crowds. Do not approach anyone who appears dazed or unresponsive. We made it to daylight by holding our positions. No heroics, just careful movements, controlled breathing, and the simple choice to stay over and over. When sunrise came, it came cold and clear. The eastern sky a flat band of colour over the city. The light revealed our deck as what it was: a small patch of concrete with 4 vehicles, a tool spread, and 5 people adjusting to a new kind of day. We took stock. 2 of the strangers who had slept near us decided to try their luck down the west approach toward Floyd Hill, hoping for a quieter exit into the foothills. Marcus advised them to move carefully and avoid contact. They thanked him, eyes hollow with the kind of gratitude people use when they know you can't go with them and wish you could. They left. We tightened our perimeter by moving the barriers to reduce our footprint. We began thinking in terms of days instead of hours. That is when the hard choices started. Survival on a highway requires water, food, a way to handle waste, and a way to keep from being overtaken. We had water from our vehicle stores, and we could scavenge sealed bottles from the cars abandoned along the ramp. Food would hold for a day or 2. MRE components, snack bars, whatever Lena had in the ambulance. Waste disposal meant a lidded bucket and heavy bags, taped tight and set away from our living area until we could drop them into an inaccessible spot below where they wouldn't draw attention. Security meant eyes and barriers, and a plan for what to do if we faced more people than we could discourage. I assigned myself to the supply lift problem. The deck gave us view, but made it hard to reach anything below without exposing ourselves. We needed a way to lift supplies from stranded cars without sending someone down every time. I walked the barrier line with a tape measure and found a point where the chain link fence sat atop a concrete ledge, with a cross brace we could use as a hanger. With seatbelts, rope, and a pulley pulled from the maintenance box, I rigged a simple block and tackle. Riley helped. We lashed the pulley to the cross brace with 3 wraps of webbing and a carabiner from the ambulance's rescue kit. We tested it with my weight first, then with a toolbox. It creaked but held. We could use a hook to snag bags and lift them, one by one, keeping human bodies on the deck and hands on the rope. Marcus and I worked the lift, while Riley scouted the lines of cars for items we needed most: sealed water, canned food with pop-tops so we wouldn't burn through our limited tool battery on a can opener attachment, blankets, extra clothing layers, and first aid supplies. He moved like a technician in a plant, eyes sweeping for hazards before hands moved, never stepping into a blind spot. He used the long pry bar to test doors before pulling them. If he saw any sign of blood or struggle inside, he moved on. We set rules like that quickly because rules are what keep a team from making mistakes when tired. Lena sorted what we brought up, creating a clean area for medical items and a separate cache for food and water. She inventoried quietly, writing with a Sharpie on duct tape labels. She was strict about not mixing medical with food. She was strict about hand cleaning. We had a finite amount of hand sanitizer. We used it as if it mattered because it did. By late morning of the second day, we had a defensible deck with enough for 2 more days, maybe 3 if we rationed. We started a log, 10 o'clock a.m. 2 people attempt to approach from the west, warned off, 12:20 p.m. Small group moving below on the main line toward east, no engagement. 1:15 p.m. 2 infected individuals attempt to climb spiral, discouraged with barrier pole taps, moved off. Writing it down kept us from letting fear rewrite the facts. At 2 p.m. on the second day, the first organized group reached our deck. They came from the west in a convoy of 3 vehicles. A battered Peterbilt day cab with its exhaust stacks cut low, an old Suburban with a brush guard, and a box truck with its roll-up door halfway open. The Suburban led, slowing at our barrier. Men in trucker caps and work jackets climbed out. The leader introduced himself as Tom Rourke, a long-haul driver with the road worn into his voice. He had the broad shoulders of someone who moved pallets for a living and the eyes of someone who had decided that a terrible week had made him the person in charge. He raised his hands, palms open toward us. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said up to our line. "We need a place to hold for a day. We have supplies. We can share. We just lost one of our own back at Floyd Hill, and we need a high spot to regroup." Marcus stood forward, patrol rifle slung across his chest, muzzle down. He kept his tone professional. "This deck is at capacity," he said. We cannot add vehicles or people without collapsing our security. There are other elevated spans a half-mile west. You can fortify there." Rourke smiled like a negotiation table had just been wheeled out. "Officer, we both know open road is a bad plan. We have a generator in the box truck, food, tools, ammunition to defend the perimeter. You let us join, we can hold this together. You turn us away, and we're all worse off." Riley stood at my shoulder, voice low in my ear. "If they get through the barrier, we lose control of our rules. If they stay, they'll draw more." Lena's eyes never stopped scanning. She counted heads, 7 men. 1 woman in the Suburban, eyes down, hands folded tight. Their trucks were heavy and would ruin our barricade plan. She whispered, "Their box truck could hide movement behind it. We won't see approach from below." I stepped to the rail, hands visible. "Tom," I said, using his name as a steadying point, "we can't take the vehicles. We can pass you water and some fuel through the fence and point you to an alternate deck that's defensible. We'll trade supplies if you need specific items." His smile thinned. "Trade implies equal footing," he said. "We're not equals. You have height and you have a cop with a rifle. You're going to share." Marcus did not raise his voice. "You need to move on now." The man next to Rourke, heavy-set, beard, a ball cap with a diesel brand, shifted his stance and rested his hand on the open door of the Suburban, where, not accidentally, the butt of a rifle sat visible. It was meant to signal readiness, not immediate hostility, but on a roadside balance beam like ours, signals have weight. "I'll say it differently," Rourke said, the smile gone. "We're coming up. If you shoot, that noise will ring all the way down the canyon, and the folks below will rush this spot. We'll all lose." He wasn't wrong about the noise. He was using it as leverage. He stepped toward the barrier. "We're moving the Suburban forward." "Stop," Marcus said. The Suburban's engine revved. The driver released the brake, and the truck inched toward the barrier at an angle calculated to pry it open with its brush guard. Riley didn't wait for more words. He grabbed the bolt cutter, slid it through the barrier handle acting as our hinge, and twisted. The makeshift lock held. The Suburban nudged the concrete and then pushed. Metal groaned. The barrier scraped 6 inches. A gap appeared and then stopped as the wire went taut. The driver gunned the engine, wheels chirping. The barrier didn't move further. Our fence creaked under the stress. Marcus made a decision that belonged to the person with the badge and the training and the responsibility no one else wanted. He shouldered the patrol rifle, aimed low, and fired a single round into the Suburban's right front tire. The tire popped. The sound, even suppressed by the grade and the wind, rolled across the canyon and came back to us a second later in a soft slap. The Suburban's front corner dropped. The brush guard lost leverage against the barrier. The truck jerked to a stop. The driver swore. Panic and anger mixed in one sound. Rourke flinched and took a step back, eyes widening not at the shot, but at the consequences he knew too. "You just brought company," he said. "We'll remember that." They backed off, fast and rough. The Suburban limped, front right wheel scraping the rim. The Peterbilt clutched hard and rolled west with a gear scream. The box truck's roll-up door banged twice as it slammed shut. They were gone in under 30 seconds, and yet the damage was done. The echo of that shot would carry like a broadcast to anyone below who had learned to move toward noise. "Positions," Marcus said, already scanning the spiral and the west approach. The first of the infected arrived within minutes, not running, not sprinting, just relentless movement that made distance a math problem. We held the spiral with poles and barriers. We kept hands out of reach. A man in a torn windbreaker did not respond to shouted commands, but he responded to a bright flashlight beam in his eyes, long enough to make him change course. 2 others climbed the lower barriers with a stubbornness that ignored scraped fingers and barked shins. We used long tools to knock their hands down, used the leverage of steel on steel rather than strength of muscle. We did not let them get close. We did not strike heads or limbs. We pushed and blocked and redirected. It was exhausting work, and it made time long again. More came, not dozens at once, but in pairs and trios, spaced out in a way that kept us from resting. We adapted. Riley installed a motion alarm on the spiral using a battery sensor meant for job site trailers. It sent a chime to a receiver on our deck. We set the volume low so only we would hear it. Every chime meant hands on tools and eyes at the fence. Lena started a rotation for hydration, handing each of us a bottle at a fixed time whether we asked or not. She kept count of the ones we had left. Marcus passed the deck into lanes of responsibility, wrote our names in grease pencil on the windshield of the cruiser to mark who held which sector at which time. It looked absurd, and yet kept our brains in order. We made it through the second day by staying in our lanes and by being lucky. Dusk brought a new wave, pulled by the lowering light and the earlier noise. We held them with barriers and the dignity of not making the situation worse than it was. At one point, a young man, maybe 20, ran at our fence with a baseball bat, eyes wild, yelling that we were hoarding help. He swung the bat into the chain link twice before Marcus told him in a voice without heat to stop. The young man paused, as if hearing his own heartbeat for the first time in an hour, then dropped the bat and walked away. Not every human challenge needed more aggression. Some of it just needed the air taken out of it. At midnight of the second night, the wind died. That was the clue. When wind dies in the mountains, sound carries clean. From the west side, we heard a new set of noises. Engines idling, men talking in low voices. A clatter that sounded like someone dragging metal across concrete to test the weight of a barrier. We all moved to the west choke point and crouched behind our vehicles. We kept our lights off. We waited for eyes to adjust. The box truck from Rourke's convoy rolled into view first, moving slow with its lights off. The Peterbilt came behind, its engine a whisper for a diesel if you didn't know what to listen for, but we did. The Suburban brought up the rear, wounded but still rolling. They formed a triangle near our barrier and idled. Then the talking stopped. The silence did the talking. Up, Marcus said quietly. Let them show intent. A figure stepped forward into the gap between trucks. The shape and gait said Rourke. He stood 10 yards back from the barrier. He didn't look up at us. He looked at the barrier itself, at the tie wire, at the way we had laced belts through handles. He was a professional assessing a load and a route. He nodded to someone in shadow. 2 men moved forward, carrying a steel pipe like a battering bar. Another 2 hooked a chain from the Peterbilt's bumper to the barrier handle, low on the concrete, and took up slack. They were about to pry and pull in one motion. Stop, Marcus said, stepping into view, rifle still slung, palms out, with that open calm that says a person is serious and not frightened into anger. We won't let you breach the gate. You'll bring all of them from below. We'll all be overrun. Rourke did look up now. In the faint light, his face was less bluster and more conviction. There is no safe alone anymore, officer, he said. You had your chance to be part of a group. We're taking the ramp. You'll live if you cooperate. The 2 men with the pipe slid it into the gap between barriers. Riley and I could feel the pressure through our hands where we braced the wire. There is a difference between preventing a frightened stranger from stumbling into your space and stopping a coordinated breach. One is human kindness plus firmness. The other is defense. Marcus made a choice again. Lena, on me, he said. Riley, Ethan, if they pull, cut the chain. Copy, Riley said, already moving to the maintenance box for the big bolt cutters. I stepped into the wedge between the cruiser and the seed yacht truck, placed my boots against the barrier's base so I could push back if needed, and wrapped a seatbelt around the barrier handle to give us a pull in the opposite direction. The Peterbilt's chain was taut. The driver revved once. The chain clanked in that way metal does when it wants to remind you that physics is personal. Last warning, Marcus said, voice low but carrying. Back off. Rourke held up a hand. The Peterbilt held. The men with the pipe looked to him. He looked at the 4 of us along the barrier. He saw no give. He lowered his hand an inch, and in that inch was a choice that could have gone either way. He smiled, small and cold. We'll be back with more, he said. Then he turned and walked to his truck. Engines revved. The convoy rolled away. "Not done," Riley said. He was measuring us. We tightened wire. We had already tightened twice. We added seatbelts across points that had no handholds and created new ones with loops of loop-edge strap. We took turns sleeping in 90-minute blocks. We waited for morning because morning was still symbolic, even if it didn't change the facts. On the third day, we learned that sound is not the only thing that draws attention. Movement does, and smoke does, and human routine does. Holding a deck above a jammed highway was like living on a ship above a reef. Currents moved below, whether or not you looked. At 10 a.m., we saw more people on foot than the day before, moving steadily toward Denver as if on an invisible trail. Some were infected, their focus simple and narrow. Some were not, their focus complicated by fear and hope in uneven measure. We stayed on our side of the fence and kept our rules. By noon, the sun had baked the concrete enough to make its radiant heat a factor. We had to conserve water. Lena set a schedule with the precious authority of someone who could keep us healthy. "Sip, don't gulp," she said. "Salt with your food. No heavy lifting during the hottest hour unless it's an emergency." It sounded like a workplace safety briefing. It was survival. We followed it. At 1:30 p.m., as if on a doomsday clock we couldn't see, the worst variant of the noise problem arrived. A gunshot from somewhere below eastbound, followed by a chorus of shouts, then a wave of bodies pushing along the edge of the spiral. Someone had fired in panic at a lower level. The infected who had been spread out now converged on that spot, and when they found nothing more to chase there, they kept moving, up the path of least resistance, which was toward us. The spiral chime sounded and kept sounding. Marcus moved to the choke point. Riley took position with the pry bar. I took the sledge because its weight felt like a promise, even though we didn't intend to swing it at anyone. We used it as a post, bracing it across the barrier edge to make a higher ledge. Hands reached. We blocked. We tapped knuckles to break grip, avoided skin contact, used the leverage of the steel to push without exposing our bodies. It worked until the number of hands overran the number of tools. "Fall back to the second fence," Marcus said, and we did, moving our line to a second row of barricades we had held in reserve. Exactly for this condition, the infected pressed the first fence, climbed over in clumsy waves, fell, got up, and pressed again. The sound of their movement was not like movie sounds. It was shoes on concrete, breath, the scrape of jackets, the thud of a shoulder against metal. It was relentless because there was no negotiation left in it. We had to break the tide. We did it without splitting our team. Riley fired a flare from a launcher he had grabbed from the maintenance box months ago for wildlife scares. He aimed not at people, but at the open shoulder 50 feet below us, where it would hiss and draw eyes that way. It worked on some. Others kept pushing until they hit the chain link and had nowhere to go. Lena stood behind us, keeping count, ready with a fire extinguisher to spray when someone got too close. The extinguisher was not a weapon in the brutal sense, but its blast of dry chemical made people step back long enough for us to reset grips and push the barrier back to level. We had prepared that tactic without discussing it out loud. It worked better than we deserved and bought us 5 minutes at a time. When the wave thinned, we braced the first fence again and relaced the wire. My hands shook, not from fear but from forearm fatigue. I looked down at my palms and saw concrete dust and black streaks from coated wire. And I thought about how those marks looked every day on a job site and how different they felt now. "We can't hold this spot indefinitely," Riley said in a quiet moment. "We're one failure away from being flooded." "Agreed," Marcus said. "We need an exit if we lose one side." "East," I said automatically, looking toward Denver, and then I saw the smoke again, the weird dim glow even in daylight. No, not east. Maybe down the service road to a frontage road, then up the hill to open ground. "We're exposed there," Lena said. "But we're equally exposed here if we get pinned between a human threat and the infected." We looked at the propane tanker parked below on the main line at the bottom of the spiral. It had come to a halt during the first jam and never moved. It sat with its hazard placards and its big, rounded tank reflecting light like a smooth, indifferent back. Propane is safe if treated with respect. It is not safe in a firefight or a siege if set near people who are desperate. "I don't love that tanker being below our only exit," Riley said. "Me neither," I said. "If that goes, the spiral becomes a fire tube." We decided right then to create a second exit not using the spiral. The deck ran to a point where the barrier looked down onto a lower embankment of crushed stone and then to the service road. If we lowered ropes, we could reach the slope and then drop to the service road in 2 steps. We assembled a rope ladder from tow straps and seat belts, building a series of rungs that we could hook over the barrier and toss down without needing to pull it back up under pressure. Would it hold under load? We tested it with 2 of us at once using a safety rope around our waists held by the other 2. It creaked, but it held. We built a second one. We tied both to anchor points on the vehicles so that if the barrier failed, the ladders would not topple with it. This was not elegant engineering. It was fieldcraft with a bias toward redundancy. Late afternoon brought quiet, the kind of false calm that follows a push. We made use of it. We ate small meals. We checked each other for injuries again. We taped hotspots on feet. We forced sleep in short rotational blocks. The sun slid toward the ridgeline. Shadows stretched across the deck into long strips that made it harder to judge distances. That's when Rourke came back for the last time. We heard his trucks before we saw them, engines under load climbing the west approach. We formed a line at the barrier. The Peterbilt rolled into view again, but this time it did not stop. It turned sideways just short of the barrier, acting like a movable wall. The box truck pulled up behind it. The Suburban idled off to the side, and 3 men got out, each carrying something heavy and wrapped in cloth. They unwrapped them to reveal long objects that were not tools. I didn't need to see more than a silhouette to know our deck had just shifted into a higher category of danger. "Down," Marcus said, and we crouched behind the vehicles. He raised his head just enough to see over the engine hood, judged their positions, and called out, "We don't want a fight." "You had your chance to be neighbours," Rourke said from behind the Peterbilt's cab. "You chose to make enemies." The first shots cracked across the deck, sharp and flat. They weren't aimed well, which is common under stress, but one struck the chain link with a metallic flick, and another hit the C-Dot truck's windshield, sending a spiderweb across the glass that made my stomach flip. We did not answer. Marcus did not fire. He knew the math. Every loud report drew not only the men behind the trucks, but also the infected below. And once that tide came, we would be a sandbar. "Keep them pinned," Rourke said to his men. "We'll move the Peterbilt in close and crush the fence." The situation had crossed the line where words carry weight. It was now load paths and reaction forces and human coordination. Riley looked at me and said one word under his breath: "Tanker." We had not talked about this because talking about it felt like giving up on other options, but the propane tanker below had sat like a variable in an equation. If it went, the spiral would be impassable. It would also burn hot enough to clear the lower approach of anything near it. It would make a wall of heat and flame and noise that would push both infected and human attackers away for a short window. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only way to reset the board if the Peterbilt breached our barrier. "We do it from distance only," I said. "No one goes down. We trigger it and run east along the deck to our ladders, then down the slope to the service road on the far side." "Marcus?" Riley asked, waiting for the one with the badge to own the call that could not be undone. Marcus looked at the barrier, at the Peterbilt, at the men who were now backing it toward the fence with their doors open so they could jump if the truck scraped and tried to climb. He looked at us. He nodded once. "Make it happen," he said. We did not run through the technical details out loud. We did not need to tell a how-to, and we would have avoided it even if we had time. We had a signal flare, and we had a tanker we did not want near us. We used what we had. Riley fired the flare from the launcher at the asphalt below, and away from any people, and watched it hiss across the shoulder toward the tanker's undercarriage. It bounced, still burning, skittered under the tank's shadow, and stopped near a point where heat would create a hazard. We turned and ran east as soon as we saw the arc was true. The men behind the Peterbilt saw us moving and shouted. Shots snapped overhead in a panicked pattern. We did not answer. We did not look back. We sprinted to the rope ladders where we had staged them, threw them over, and clipped safety lines to our belts so that if one of us slipped, the others could arrest the fall. The flare hissed below for a heartbeat too long, and then a deep, dull sound rolled up through the spiral like the first beat of a distant drum. Heat blossomed. Bright light swept the underside of the deck even before the pressure wave reached us. The tanker had become an event. The rope ladders swung as heat hit the concrete and made the air move in a way that pushed ears and lungs out of sync. We climbed down as quickly and safely as we could, boots slipping on dusty rungs, hands tight enough to leave line marks on palms. The far side embankment led to the service road that bent around a thicket of scrub oak and out toward a maintenance gate. We moved at a controlled jog along that path, looking over shoulders because you are always allowed to look in a moment like that. And what we saw made the choice feel the only one we could have made. The spiral we had used as our only access point was now a chimney of heat and light, and any person on it, infected or not, was turning aside, because human instinct tells you when heat is too much for skin. We reached the service road and found it relatively clear, probably because the tanker had convinced everyone nearby to find distance. We cut across the gravel toward a maintenance gate I had keyed through 1,000 times with my ID badge. It was still padlocked, powered latch dead without grid. Riley cut the chain with bolt cutters in 2 blows. We pulled the gate open and slipped through to a frontage road that paralleled the main line but dipped behind a small hill and an old retaining wall. We turned onto it and ran east for 100 yards to get out from under the worst of the heat. I do not know what Rourke and his men did in that minute. I imagine the Peterbilt driver stomped his brake when he felt the blast and the heat, and the way the deck itself seemed to exhale. I imagine they backed away from the barrier, not out of fear, but out of an understanding that metal moves under load and heat changes lines, and that even men who think they are hard find edges they respect. I know they did not follow us down the ladders, because if they had, they would have met us in the ditch below, and they did not. We gathered at a spot where the frontage road cut between rock and scrub oak, where the noise from the main line walled off everything else like a masking tape line you place to keep paint clean. We took stock again. No one was burned. No one was struck. We had our packs, our first aid, 2 long tools, and Lena's medical bags. We had a plan to reach open ground, and then a smaller road that would take us up toward a water tank, and a set of radio towers, where we could evaluate next options with height and line of sight. Marcus looked at me. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, and I was, in the way a person who has just executed an action they never wanted to consider is good, which is to say steady enough to help the next person. Riley breathed out slowly and then smiled a tired, bent smile. "Next time," he said, "we pick a hideout without a giant fuel bomb under the front door." We moved. We kept to the shallow ditch, heads below the line where anyone on the deck could see us, and angled toward a maintenance path that cut through the grass toward a cluster of utility boxes. The path led into a thicket, and the thicket opened into a small clearing where the utility crews had parked over the years. There were tire marks, flattened grass, and, to our luck, a service pickup with a logo from a contractor we used for lane markings. Its doors were locked. Riley checked the windows, then used his pry bar to nudge a rear quarter window enough to reach the manual lock. He did it with the skill of someone who has opened trucks in snowstorms for forgetful operators. Careful, controlled, with respect for the tool and for the window. The door opened. The keys were not in the ignition. He checked the visor. No keys. He checked under the floor mat and behind the instrument panel trim where some old-timers still taped a spare. No keys. "Okay," he said. "No free ride. We move on foot." "Better anyway," Marcus said. Vehicles draw attention. We shouldered our packs and moved up the slope toward the radio towers. The path was steep and the gravel loose, but we made good time. From the top, we could see the overpass deck and the main line and the plume from the tanker, now a column that bent east with the wind and dissipated as it rose. The deck itself was a small rectangle in a large system, and somewhere on it, our barriers were still laced, and our vehicles still sat at angles that made sense to us, even if we weren't there to see them. We turned our eyes away from what we had left and toward what we could reach. The tower hill had a utility shed with a steel door and a keypad. No power meant no keypad. Riley looked at the hinge pins and shook his head. We're not breaking into that quietly. We don't need the shed, Lena said. She was looking at the tower's base, at the concrete pad and the bolts that held it down. We need line of sight and a minute to breathe. We sat with our backs to the concrete base and let our pulse slow. We ate a small ration each, a few bites of a protein bar and a swallow of water. We could see the wide neighborhood of roofs eastward and the long grey lines of roads that had defined our jobs for years. Without the movement of normal traffic, the roads looked like static shapes, broken hieroglyphs we used to read and now had to relearn. We had options. Continue east toward the urban area with more resources and more risk, or turn west into the foothills with fewer people and fewer supplies. If any coordinated support still existed, it would concentrate in the city. If any quiet still existed, it would sit in the folds of the hills. What about the Golden Maintenance Yard? I asked. It's off Colfax, behind the old industrial strip, fenced. Fuel tanks, tools. If the team there held, they'd let CDOT badges in. Assuming they're there, Marcus said. Assuming they didn't get overrun in the first day. Assuming we can reach it without drawing a tail. Assuming, Riley echoed. But it beats walking blind. Lena nodded. We also need to think about others. We can provide help if we have a secure base. Right now, we can't even safely hand someone a bandage without exposing ourselves. We oriented our map. I had a paper atlas in my pack. I always carry one, not because I don't trust GPS, but because I know batteries die, and satellites don't care if you made a wrong turn under stress. We traced a route that avoided the main line and the obvious arterials. We used side streets and a bike path that paralleled Clear Creek. We planned rest points every mile. We chose a fallback if we hit a blocked path. The walk started well and stayed manageable because we kept our rules. We did not approach anyone. If someone called for help from a distance and there were no others nearby, we stopped and spoke in clear voices and gave directions to safer ground, but we did not move closer. That choice never felt good, but it also never felt wrong. The best help was to not get pulled into a situation we could not control. Near the Clear Creek path, we encountered our first organised camp. A cluster of tents pitched against the wall of an old warehouse, with pallets stacked as a fence and a banner that read, "Safe Stop" in black spray paint. A man with a reflective vest and a shovel stood at the opening. He waved as if we were friends arriving. We stopped at 20 yards. Marcus took a step ahead of us and introduced us. He asked if they had any sick. The man said no, but looked away when he said it. We saw 2 people in the back of the camp on the ground, covered by blankets, not moving. We left a sealed box of bottled water by a rock and told them where we had been and where we were going. The man asked if we could stay and help defend the camp that night. Marcus told him the truth. We could not. The man nodded, eyes heavy, and said, "Then keep moving. Bring back news if you find any." News. We all still wanted it. We all still listened to empty radios for it. On the bike path, a solar-powered emergency call box blinked a red LED without any power to it at all, as if its small internal battery had tried to keep the promise it was made for and then given up. We kept moving east along the creek, using the water for orientation and the bushes for cover when others passed. The Golden Maintenance Yard sat behind a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The gate was closed. The yard inside was quiet, but did not look abandoned. There were footprints in dust near the office trailer. The fueling station canopy cast a sharp rectangle of shade. A CDOT plough truck sat at an angle, as if parked in a hurry at the end of the last snow event and never moved again. I felt something in my chest that I might call hope if I had more energy. Marcus called out, "CDOT crew, this is Trooper DeSoto with a small group. We're approaching the gate. We're not infected." Silence at first. Then a voice from behind the office door, taut but not hostile. "Throw your badges onto the concrete and back up 5 steps." We did as told. The badges slid and clicked. We stepped back. The door cracked open. 2 faces peered out. A man and a woman I recognized from winter operations. Javier, veteran plow operator, and Kim, yard supervisor. Their eyes went to our faces, our hands, our stance. They opened the door fully and waved us in quickly. We moved through the gate into a yard that had been turned from a staging area into a shelter in 48 hours. There were water barrels under the canopy. There were pallets of sandbags stacked not for floods but for barricades. There were industrial shelves with clear bins labelled for gloves and masks and small parts. The place was quiet, but it had the hum of plans. Inside the office trailer, a whiteboard filled the wall. On it were time blocks, names, assignments. Watch, 12 p.m., 3 o'clock p.m., Kim and Javier, 3 p.m., 6 o'clock p.m., Tom and Mia, fuel inventory, first aid, perimeter check. It looked like a winter storm plan. It was a survival plan now. 2 more workers sat at the small conference table, eyes on us. Mia, who handled materials ordering, and Tom, who ran the loader on snow days. They had already done the math on how many mouths the yard could support. They had a gravity water filter set up on a pallet table, dripping a slow, faithful rhythm. Kim did not waste calories on thoughts that did not change outcomes. "We can take you in if you can contribute," she said. "Skills?" "Engineer," I said reflexively, then added, "I know this yard. I know the fuel system. I can design barricades that use less mass for more effect." Riley said, "Maintenance, fabricator, generator management, problem solving." "Trooper," Marcus said, then added what matters most now. "I can set rules and enforce them so people don't get hurt." "EMT," Lena said. "Triage, wound care, infection control." Kim nodded once for each entry. "All right," she said. "Then you're ours for the moment and we're yours. We have people coming in and out. We need to decide if this is a shelter or a checkpoint." Marcus asked the right, hard question. "Have you had anyone turn inside the fence?" Javier looked at the floor. "First day," he said. "We didn't know how fast. We know now." Lena took that information with a steady face. "Anyone who's been bitten does not come inside," she said. "We can set up an outside care area to comfort, but not in. We don't have enough PPE for inner care." Kim gestured to the whiteboard. "We have positions assigned for the next 24 hours. After that, we'll need to move or reinforce. We're drawing too much traffic on Colfax and too many people are looking for fuel. We can hold if we're discreet." Discreet would be difficult with a fence and a canopy visible from the road. We had work to do, and we did it the way crews always do, by breaking a problem into smaller tasks and assigning names to each. Riley and Tom built a visual screen along the fence. Using old billboard vinyl we had salvaged for weather protection years ago, they zip-tied it to the chain link so passers-by could not see the vehicles inside. It turned the yard from an advertisement into a blank wall, which is what you want when you are not selling anything but stability. I worked with Javier to reroute the fuel station plumbing to an internal dispensation point so we could fill cans without rolling vehicles under the canopy where they would be visible. We closed the external shutoff and opened a bypass valve inside the shed. We placed a spill berm under the tap and set a rule. No one filled without a second person watching and a third person holding the fire extinguisher. Lena set up a triage area outside the fence under an awning. She used duct tape to mark off clean and dirty zones. She placed a hand washing station at the entrance to the clean zone and posted a sign that said in black marker, "Wash hands, no exceptions." She found a way to say no with kindness and a way to say yes with conditions. She also kept notes. Symptoms, timing, outcomes, because data under strain can save you the next day. Marcus wrote a compact version of the rules on a piece of plywood with a paint marker and hung it at eye level for anyone who approached. Stop at the line and wait to be called. No weapons past this point. No entry if bitten. We can offer water and guidance. Do not crowd. Do not shout. We are here to keep people safe. He stood by it as if guarding a courthouse. People read the sign, looked at his posture, and understood that pushing would not help them. We created something like a rhythm in a place not meant for it. A woman with 2 children stopped and asked for water, and we gave them bottles and pointed them to the bike path. A man with a head wound we bandaged and sent with a small first aid kit. He said thank you in a voice that sounded like he had not used it in a while. A pair of teenagers asked if we had food. We gave each a wrapped protein bar and an apple from the break room fridge, the last fresh things we had. They laughed in relief and then stopped themselves, as if laughter were illegal now. At sunset on that day, a small group approached the gate with care that told us they were paying attention to rules. They stopped at the line. Their leader raised his hands, open palms, the universal for we are not trying to surprise you. He said his name was Darius. He had 3 people with him, and they had been sheltering in a nearby warehouse office. They were looking for somewhere more secure. He did not claim to have supplies, did not claim to be able to trade. He said simply, "We can work." We asked him to wait. We stepped into a circle near the trailer door where no one could overhear. Kim said, "We cannot take everyone who asks. If we take no one, we become a target. If we take everyone, we starve and fight." Marcus said, "We take workers who accept rules. We do not take anyone who wants to tell us our rules are wrong before they've lived them." We brought them in, one at a time, searching bags, asking about symptoms, checking for injuries. Darius was honest. He was a forklift operator at a distribution center and knew how to move heavy things without breaking people's backs or the items. He listened when we explained the perimeter, and he nodded without offering suggestions. He asked where to wash his hands. He asked where to sleep. He asked when his shift was. He fit, and his people did too. It was a small victory. Morning. The next day brought a thin line of smoke over the horizon toward downtown that had not been there the day before. We listened to the radios because even static changes if you know what to hear. On the state channel, we caught a fleeting message. National Guard elements consolidating near Buckley, not accepting civilian traffic. It was distant, and it may as well have been on a different planet, but it told us one thing clearly. Rescue was not designed around us. We would be supporting ourselves for a while. Mid-morning brought a convoy we did not welcome. 3 pickups, lifted and loud, with a bed full of men who looked tired and hungry and not interested in the sign about weapons. They rolled to a stop at the gate, engines idling like a threat. The driver of the lead truck leaned out the window. His arm had a bandana tied tightly above the elbow, crusted with dried stains. He spoke in a casual tone that did too much work to sound casual. "We need fuel," he said. "A lot of it. Fill our cans and we'll be on our way." Marcus stepped forward with his hands visible. "We can offer a small amount to each vehicle," he said. "We are preserving fuel for critical uses. We don't have enough to provide bulk." The driver smiled without humor. "You're sitting on tanks," he said. "Don't tell me you don't have enough." "We have enough for our needs," Marcus said. "Not enough for giveaways." "We're not asking," the driver said, and the man in his passenger seat lifted a long object slightly as if stretching. Riley leaned to me. "This is the moment," he said. "If we give them bulk, we're a pump for anyone with a truck and a threat. If we don't, we need to be ready to move them off." Kim looked from the men in the trucks to our team, to the fence. She pulled her hard hat on as if that mattered. It did not. It was a gesture of being ready to work. She said to Marcus, "Hold the line." Marcus nodded to me and Riley and Lena. He did not raise his voice. Positions. We held the line because rules matter most when someone tests them. It took a long minute and the arrival of 2 more members of our yard team in view, with slung tools for the lead truck driver to decide he did not want to escalate here. He put his truck in gear. He spat out the window in a direction that was not at anyone, but not at anyone either. He drove off. The beds of the trucks were full of men with hungry eyes, and they stared at us the way people look at a menu when a kitchen is closed. We watched them go. We did not breathe out until their taillights were gone. We lasted one more day in the yard before the flow of people toward the fence told us our discreet shelter had become a point on a map. We held a quick meeting at sunset. The board had new names and new tasks. We could either fortify deeper, knowing that more traffic would arrive, or we could relocate in the night to a site less obvious, then work from there to assist others quietly. Relocate, Kim said. We don't have enough here to survive a crowd. We can break this into 2 crews. One goes with the loader and the plow truck to a quarry site up the hill we used for staging rock during a slide last year. Fenced, with a single gate. The other crew pulls what fuel and supplies we can and follows, then doubles back to pass information to any camps along the way. Marcus assigned roles. Riley would go with the first crew to set power and water catchment at the quarry. I would go with the second crew to pull materials, close the yard, and then run a message route east along Colfax for a mile to tell the small camps the yard was no longer a public stop, and give them the map coordinates for the quarry site, where strict rules would be posted. Lena would split her supplies and go with the first crew to establish the medical area and leave a small cache for me to hand to the camps along the route. Kim and Javier would lead the first convoy. Marcus would go with me to handle any human problems. We executed that plan at 10 p.m, headlights off, moving in a quiet line like a plow column rolling out to meet a snow event. The quarry site had an uphill approach we could block with the loader placed crosswise. The fence needed patching. We did that with bar mat and wire. The fuel was enough for 2 weeks with strict rationing and no idling. The water catchment was a tarp strung over a gravel basin, channeling dew into barrels. It would not be enough if the weather stayed dry, but it was something to start. The message route along Colfax was predictable in its unpredictability. Camps had formed in parking lots, behind walls, in alleys. We stopped at 4 and passed the same information. The yard was closed to public entry. A new shelter was forming uphill with strict rules. We could not offer escort. We left small aid at each. 2 bottles of water, a roll of trash bags, a handful of bandages. It felt like being a courier in a city that had gone quiet except for its desperate corners. At the 4th stop, a voice behind us on the sidewalk said, "You were at the overpass." We turned. Tom Rourke stood in the doorway of a closed auto shop with 2 of his men. His face was drawn thinner than when we had seen him last. The Suburban's right front wheel had been replaced by a mismatched spare. He looked at us, not with anger, though that was there, but with calculation. "You burned the spiral," he said, bold. "We did what we had to do to prevent being overrun," Marcus said. His voice had no apology. It had no triumph. It had a statement of fact. Rourke tilted his head. "You're moving people to the hills now? Quarry?" "We're informing small camps that we are closing the yard," I said, deliberately not answering. "It is not safe to concentrate people where we cannot control numbers." Rourke nodded as if he already knew and wanted to hear if we would confirm. "We're heading east," he said. "There's talk of a National Guard site at Buckley. Might be real, might be a rumour. I'm taking my people and seeing. If it's nothing, we'll be back in the hills, and maybe we'll be neighbours after all." I could see him thinking. I could also see the tension in his shoulders that told me his people were fraying. The road had not made him calmer. It had made him tired. He looked at Marcus and then at me. "You were right about noise," he said. "It draws them. It also draws people who think noise is how you get fed. We make quiet places," Marcus said. "We make rules. We keep them." Rourke cracked a small, tired smile. "Rules," he said. "Maybe we'll try that. Good luck, engineer." "Good luck, driver," I said. We moved on. The city was not sleeping as much as it was hunkered down. By dawn, we had finished our route and returned to the quarry site. Riley had the generator running behind a berm to push the sound into the hillside. He had hung LED lights inside the main shed, and their glow made the space look almost normal. Lena had set up her triage area in one corner and posted her clean, dirty signage. Kim had written the rules again on plywood and hung them at the gate. Javier had found a rack for tools and lined them up with the kind of neatness you keep for sanity. We made it one more week. The quarry site became a small outpost with a strict intake, a schedule, and a perimeter that made sense. We sent pairs out on foot to check nearby camps. We brought in 3 more workers who could weld, lift, and not argue. We turned away 7 who wanted to rewrite the rules before they had helped stack a single sandbag. We gave water to more people than we could count, and told them to move at first light toward less crowded places. We listened to the radios for any coordinated message, and accepted the reality that if it came, it would not be tailored for us. During that week, the infected never stopped. They were present in the background like the hum of a transformer you learn to sleep next to in a city apartment. They moved along roads and between buildings, drawn by motion and sound. They tested our fence sometimes in 1s and 2s. They kept distance if we kept quiet and still. We learned to freeze rather than run. We learned that a calm voice across a short distance carries more safety than a shout across a long one. We learned that we could hold this small patch if we did not try to make it more than it was. On the 8th day, a column of military vehicles passed on the highway far below, heading east. They did not slow for the quarry. They did not send a scout up the road. We watched them and did not wave because we did not want to be seen by the people behind them, who would not have worn the same uniforms. We felt something like relief, mingled with the practical suspicion that comes from being on your own for a week and doing fine despite it. On the 9th day, 2 things happened that changed our direction again. First, a wildfire started south of us, when winds pushed a smouldering structure into dry grass and then into a slope. We saw the smoke column grow. We tracked its spread with the instincts of people who have watched wind maps for years. We knew the quarry was in its possible path. Second, a small group arrived from the east, with an infant wrapped in a blanket, and a need that made rules reconfigure. We could not turn them away. We would not. We reorganized our interior space to make room for the baby and the parents. We adjusted our rationing and our sleep schedule. We built a small crib from a pallet and a blanket. It was the most deliberate, defiant act we took all week. That night, we held a meeting near the generator, where its hum would blur our voices to anyone listening outside the fence. We spoke quietly and without drama. Kim said, "We need to relocate before the fire changes the wind and pushes ash down on us. We can either move northwest along the ridge to an old rock processing plant, or move east to a concrete plant near the river. The rock plant is easier to defend. The concrete plant has water." "Water," Lena said simply. "Water," Riley agreed. "We can augment defense with cars and barriers. We can't make water without power we don't have, and a stream we can't reach here." We decided to move at first light. We loaded what we could into the loader's bucket and the plow truck bed. We secured the generator and strapped the fueled cans so they would not slosh. We carried the baby and the medical kits in the center of the group. We left behind what we had to. 2 pallets of material we could not move without attracting attention, a broken piece of equipment that had no quick fix, and a note on the plywood at the gate that said, "Moved east, rules apply, keep moving, stay safe." We did not add directions. We gave them to the people we had met and trusted to interpret them. We rolled out like a snowplow convoy again, quiet and careful, using back roads and alleys and power line cuts. We avoided movement that made noise. We avoided straight lines. We stopped twice to let groups pass. At the river, we used the maintenance path to approach the concrete plant. Its fence was high. Its yard was cluttered with forms and pallets. Its office had a window we could cover. Its water supply was a hydrant riser we could open with a special wrench I had in my pack, because sometimes the details you carry for convenience become the difference between waiting and doing. We set up again, faster this time, because practice matters. Riley placed the generator in a pit to further muffle it and ran the LED lights inside only. Lena posted her signs. Kim updated the board. Javier arranged the tools. Marcus hung the rules and stood by them. Darius set the forklifts in stable configurations as barricades. The baby slept in the pallet crib, and the sound of that slow, regular breathing made us all keep cadence with it. In the first hour at the new site, an elderly man in a denim shirt approached the gate slowly, hands visible, alone. He stopped at the line and waited. When we met him, he said he had seen our move and had something to trade. A radio scanner antenna tuned for VHF and a small solar panel with a charge controller. He wanted water and the promise of one night inside a fence. He was direct. He was not desperate. He had made a plan and executed it. We accepted the trade and his overnight. We installed the antenna and heard more than static that night. We heard a voice from the foothills say to anyone listening, "We are safe for now. We have rules. We can take families who want to work. If you are looking for trouble, keep moving." It was not our voice. It was someone else who had made a deck into a fortress and then a fortress into a community. I lay down that night on a concrete floor in an office that had become a dormitory. My hands ached. My forearms felt like cables that had been pulled taut too many times in one day. I could feel the texture of the rope ladder rungs in my sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw the overpass deck. Our vehicles at angles, the flare arc, the flash, the ladders, the spiral. I saw the yard's whiteboard. I saw Kim's hard hat. I saw Rourke standing in a doorway saying maybe rules had value. I saw Lena's signs and the way people obeyed them, because the alternative was to admit that no one knew anything, and people prefer to know a small thing for sure than a big thing for maybe. In the morning, I woke to the sound of a distant helicopter. It passed over the river and turned toward the city. It did not slow. It did not hover. It did what it was doing, and we did what we were doing. Our lot at the concrete plant was not a city, and not a farmhouse, and not a bunker. It was a working site with a fence, a generator, a water source, a team, and rules. It was enough to make day 3 follow day 2, and day 10 follow day 9. It was enough to give us a way to help others without letting ourselves become part of the incident. If you ask me what the overpass meant in the week after, I would say it was where I learned to count noise as a resource and line of sight as currency. It was where I learned that a pry bar and a clear sentence can change the shape of a day. It was where I learned that people like Marcus keep order, not because they like to tell others what to do, but because someone has to hold the line where fear wants to run through. It was where I learned that burning a path is not victory. It is creating a window for people to move to the next place where they can make better choices. We stayed at the concrete plant for 2 more weeks. The baby grew louder, which felt like a good omen. Darius taught 3 new arrivals how to stack pallets so they would not fall. Riley built a windbreak from forms that made the generator almost disappear as a sound. Lena trained 2 people in wound care and hygiene, using hand sanitizer like liquid gold and reminding everyone that clean hands are a kindness. Kim ran the board like a dispatcher in winter, and we all loved her for it. Javier built a small garden in a gravel bin, just to do one thing that was about the future. One evening, as the sun went down and the shadows grew long across the lot, a small, familiar convoy rolled to a stop outside the fence. The Suburban was in front, cleaner than last time. The Peterbilt had been left somewhere else. The box truck was gone. Tom Rourke stepped out, alone. He stopped at the line. He raised his hands. He did not smile. He looked like someone who had walked a long way, even if he had driven most of it. "Thought you went east," Marcus said. "I did," Rourke said. "Buckley is locked down tight. They're taking only their own. Fair enough. I don't blame them. Out east it's flat and open is good for moving but bad for hiding. I figured out I prefer fences and rules now." "We have both," Marcus said, "and we have limited space." "I'm not looking to bring in a crowd," Rourke said. "Just me and the one who stayed. I can work, I can drive, I can keep my people to my word. You let us in. You'll have a driver who understands that a barricade isn't a debate, unless you invite it. We looked at each other across the inside space that had become ours and theirs and anyone's who would follow the board. We made a decision, the way you make a bridge rating, by checking load paths and safety margins and whether the structure can handle a new force without dropping anyone. We let them in. Rourke came through the gate like a man entering a shop he wanted to work in, not a castle he wanted to own. He looked at the rules board and read it as if it were a manual. He nodded at each line. He said, "I can live with that." He meant it. 2 nights later, he sat with me on the loading dock step, looking toward the river. The radio scanner antenna hissed a baseline of distant voices. Most of them were small and local. Some were fragments of larger directives that sounded like they were broadcast to an entire state. The wind shifted. We could smell smoke from the wildfire south. The sky flickered faintly where the city still tried to power its edges. He spoke without looking at me. "You were right on the overpass," he said. "Noise gets you killed. Pride maybe too. It was your right to try," I said. "It was ours to stop you. We're all here now, so maybe the math worked." He said, "Maybe." Then he added, "Next time, if there is a next time, I'll try rules first." We talked about slab thickness and the best way to back a trailer into a tight spot without scraping the paint on a fence that mattered. We talked about keeping people fed on fewer calories. We talked about making a job list that put the hardest work early, or people still had energy and left the inventory for the afternoon, when the sun makes everything slower. We did not talk about the tanker. We did not have to. Some things don't need reminders. In the weeks that followed, we built more than a camp. We built a routine. People who passed by read the rules, took water, and moved on. A few stayed and worked. Those who wanted to be in charge of something other than themselves did not last. Those who wanted others to admire their bravery did not last either. Those who could stack, count, lift, measure, carry, fetch, check, and return, those lasted. When the next convoy of official vehicles passed the highway a month later, this time moving west, they did slow, just a little, as if counting heads, fences, and whether our yard was a problem. They moved on. We did not flag them. We did not need them to stop to feel like we had earned something. We learned the names of the local hills as if they were neighbours. We learned which nights the wind would pick up at 10 p.m. and then die at 2 a.m. We learned to hear the difference between someone shouting in panic and someone calling in request. We learned that a quiet place can exist even in noisy times if you do all the small things that keep it quiet. I still think about the deck. I think about the first emergency tones and the way we built a fence from wire and belts and rules. I think about the flare and the ladder and the blast we didn't want but used. I think about the first day's decision to hold and the second day's decision to move when holding became a form of waiting to fail. I think about Lena's steady hands and Marcus's steady voice and Riley's steady tools. I think about Rourke at the line and then inside it. I think about a baby sleeping and how that sound becomes the metronome for a place. If anyone asks later what we did in those days, I will tell them this. We built an overpass fortress because we had to. Then we left it because we had to. And then we built better. We made a habit of keeping people safe by saying no to things that would get us hurt and saying yes to work that made us worth the water we drank. We kept moving until the place we were matched the plan we had. We did not win anything. We did not lose everything. We survived and gave others the chance to do the same. That is enough for now. And now is what you build on. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.